last week we finished chapters 6 and 7. They were both a little bit shorter. This evening we have chapters 8 and 9 ready. They are a little bit longer than what 6 and 7 were, but we're certainly under no rush, so we'll take our time getting through them. I don't anticipate that we'll make it all the way through both of them this evening, but I guess we'll find out. But as has been our custom, let's turn over to Esther, and we'll start out by reading chapter 8 in its entirety. Chapter 6 and 7, the plot of Haman against Mordecai and against the Jews was exposed. At the end of chapter 7, Haman was hung on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And so we pick up in chapter 8, and it reads, "On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the things seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that should come unto my people? For how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, to the lieutenants and the deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came to the Jews, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. So with all that in mind, we'll change over to our book now. We don't need that right now. We'll start out reading. And Sierra, would you go ahead and grab verse 1 for us?
On that day the king Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai became king for the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. In this chapter we see things start to reverse. Even as at Esther's request, the king does not do away with what all Haman had planned. He just told Mordecai to write whatever he pleased unto the Jews. For every evil Satan has devised for God's people, there is enough in God's word to help us to overcome whatever befalls us. Where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. I want to go back to the 7th verse in chapter 7. As I said before, everyone will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Satan will too will be judged. Judgment has been given unto Christ in his body, the church. Haman stood before Esther, not the king, asking for his life. Esther represents the church. Back in verse 1, on the day of the king's wrath was pacified, he gave the house of Haman unto Esther. When things are ended in God's mind, the saints and all those in that position in the church will receive the house of Haman also, as pictured here. What was the house of Haman? Haman was the chief priest of the entire province. We find this is the same position that the church will come into to rule and reign with Christ. When Christ's wrath is poured out on the earth and he is satisfied, then this righteous reign will begin. Haman stood before Esther and made request for his life. Everyone on this earth will stand before Christ and the church to make request for their lives.
Thank you. So are there any questions or comments on that section? Esther chapter 7 verse 7 is just the verse talks about how Haman went to Esther to make a request for his life because he saw that the king was none too pleased with him. He's fixing to kill him. There were no questions or thoughts for that section. Tony, would you go ahead and grab... Oh, Sierra?
I kind of know this answer, but I just kind of want, clarification. I don't know. But how it says, Haman reigns and rules, and they're comparing that to Satan reigning and ruling. And I just want to know, exactly what that means.
Well, we see Satan is really the prince of this earth right now. He has dominion over the world and the liberty to do as he sees fit. I think we see his hand in the principalities and the powers, and the things that they do. We see his deception everywhere because of that. So in that way, Satan really is a ruler right now. I would also call to remembrance when Jesus was taken up to the top of the mountain by Satan. Satan offered him all the kingdoms of the earth. I think it said it in one of the chapters that we just read that Satan wouldn't have been able to offer Jesus those things if they weren't his offer to begin with.
So when we take that position, I guess the titles or the roles we have is liberty over people?
No, we'll be in a different position. Satan right now has liberty to rule the earth, knowing that God has given a day where that's going to be. Christ comes back, Satan's rule on this earth is going to be over. So right now, God is just giving Satan liberty over to do his will over the world, within the confines of God's will too. The position that we will be in will be a position higher than that, because as Christ is not just temporary ruler of the earth, temporary ruler of creation, like Satan is. Christ is God. Christ is the de facto king over everything. And we, looking at this position of brideship that we're going to be coming into, it's not a maybe someone else can also clarify on the thought too. I mean, it just, it's like the difference between Esther and Haman. Does that make sense? Haman was a agent of King Ahasuerus. Esther was the wife of King Ahasuerus. So Haman had control over everything that King Ahasuerus gave him control over, but Esther had control up to half the kingdom because of her position as wife. I don't know. Maybe someone can describe it better than I can.
I don't know if I can describe it any better, but here, like you say, Satan has rule of the earth, but here we have the church that's here doing good.
Yeah.
As Esther was doing good there among the evil there, is saying that that's kind of what we're doing here and now until the return of Christ. We're here trying to convert and to represent Christ through his church here on earth.
Anybody else have any thoughts on it? If not, were there any other thoughts or questions to go along with this section? If not, Tony, will you go ahead and pick up at verse 2 there, and go ahead and grab 2 and 3, and we'll pause for question and comment, and then we'll give you verse 4 as well.
Esther 8:2 says, "And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman." Now notice, Esther set Mordecai. The king gave the seal of approval, but Esther sent him over the house of Haman. God's laws and his righteousness will be set in all the earth by the righteousness of Christ, which Esther represents. The authority is with Christ and his church. Ahasuerus had already put Esther in a position to do this. God in the beginning set Christ in a position of authority over all the earth. Esther 8:3 says, "And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews." So we see, even though Esther has been put in authority over the house of Haman and these things, she still showed her humility in the presence of the king. Without holiness, no man can see God. We too must show our humility.
Is there any questions or thoughts on that section before we moved on a little bit? Now, would you go ahead and grab verse 4 and verse 5?
The king held, Esther 8:4 says, "The king held out the golden scepter toward Esther, so Esther arose and stood before the king." That is a beautiful picture here. Without Christ being held out to us, we cannot stand before the king. Christ was held out to all the world, and unless we touch that scepter, there is no way that we will stand before God. Esther 8:5 says, "And said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I will be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. Notice Esther said, I have done this and this. Let it be done. First she made the request for herself. Then she asked the king to reverse things. But we'll see the king did not do this. He let Mordecai do it. God too lets his laws set things.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on that section? Brother Joe, how you feeling tonight? Feel like reading?
Yeah.
Would you grab 6, 7, and 8 there for us?
Okay. For now I can endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people. Oh, how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? That will be one of the greatest things to endure during the kingdom age, to see our loved ones destroyed or punished during God's wrath. Then the king Ashur said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write you also to the Jews as it likes you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and the seal with the king's ring may not be reversed. Let me read the rest of it.
Yeah, please. Go with it.
In other words, as Mordecai represented the law in our study, I believe it's God's law that will be represented for the Jews, and the Jews represents God's people here on earth. I'm not saying you are saved by the law. You are saved by the faith in Christ. The king pointed out that he had given the house of Haman to Esther. All that God has, he has given unto Christ, but God's law will rule over that. Just like Mordecai is going to rule over the house of Haman. He is saying what has gone on before must go on. It cannot be canceled. God does not cancel any of his word. God came to the house of Israel, and just because they were not faithful to his word, God did not cancel what he had promised them. He did not just start over. He just gave these promises to another. Even though Satan is a prince of the earth at the present time, God has given us the church, the authority to stand against him, and this is written in God's word, old and new. God never did away with the old covenant. It was fulfilled. And he made a new covenant, a better covenant. Down through the ages, God has added to his promise and blessings. We are told that they, the Old Testament saints, cannot be made perfect without us, because in the church is fulfilled of all God's blessing and inheritance made from the beginning of time. Jesus went and preached to the Old Testament saints. They had accepted him, just as we do today. And then they were all set free.
Thank you, brother. Any questions or comments on that section?
I have a few questions.
Okay.
The first question I have it says, I believe it is God's law that will be represented for the Jews, and the Jews represent God's people here on earth. And I just did not understand that.
Oh, they're at the top.
Yeah, the first commentary for 7 and 8. There's 2 lines. Right below 7 and 8.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not really sure what he means by that. Some of his thought process in his writing, every once in a while, he'll clean up some sentences that make absolutely no sense. This is one that I'm not really sure what he meant by it. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, so I wasn't really, couldn't learn how his mind worked. Give you insight to that. I don't know if anybody else might have more insight into what he might mean by it, but.
And then my second question was in the middle of the last paragraph. It says, God never did away with the old covenant, it was fulfilled. And I just wanted clarification that it was fulfilled. For some reason I thought it wasn't fulfilled. Yeah.
It was fulfilled in as far as Christ fulfilled the law. I think that's what he was talking about
Okay.
there.
Christ did away, he fulfilled,
Yeah.
did away with the law.
Yeah. So the old covenant was contingent on adherence to the law. So as Christ fulfilled that old covenant was fulfilled in Christ. Was there any other thoughts or questions? If not, I'll go ahead and grab our next section here. Verse 9, then were the king's scribes called at that time of the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. It was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, to the lieutenants and the deputies and the rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, according to every province, according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. We'll just pause there before we read the thought. I do want to point out, it is important to note that when Haman made the decree that the Jews were all to be killed, it was in the 1st month of the year, right? The decree was meant to be carried out, and I believe it was the 11th month of the year. So he gave them almost a full year from the time the decree was made until it was to be carried out. The Esther and Mordecai were very quick to act in finding a solution to the destruction of the people. It's like how we know that there is a judgment coming. We know that we still have time before it comes, but we're not called to be a people who wait till the very last minute to do anything about it. We're to be prepared, knowing that this is coming. And just like Christ did, right? Christ came to the earth. He gave the remedy for sin, reconciled us back to God long before he intended to come back in his wrath and destroy those who are disobedient, because he gives us the grace of time. But I just figured I would point that out there. Continue on the thoughts here in our booklet. you can see in that day that there was a lot of provinces to rule, and 127 provinces represent Satan's rule today over all the earth. So here we have this great kingdom of Ahasuerus. It was all the known world. It was typical of the great kingdom of God that is to come upon the earth. These things pertaining to the kingdom are going to take place whether we are prepared for them or not. We'll pause there. Were there any thoughts or questions on that section before we move on? If not, I'll go ahead and grab the next section. Verse 10 and 11. And he wrote in the King Ahasuerus' name and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback and riders on mules and camels and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. God's word had gone out unto all the world, and will be a witness to all who do not do it. When the gospel of the kingdom is preached to all the world, then will the end come. There is a difference between the gospel of salvation and the gospel of the kingdom. Most religions preach only the gospel of salvation. They can throw a lot of emotions into it, and draw in a lot of people because it can energize the flesh, where the gospel of the kingdom takes more reasoning and understanding. This is what Jesus came preaching, the gospel of the kingdom. The gospel of salvation is a free gift. Great kings give gifts. Very few who have received the gift of salvation have went on to perfection or maturity that it speaks of in Hebrew. Anyone can follow on that wide road that leads to destruction, but the gate to the kingdom is narrow, and few there are who find it. These Jews were told to stand for their lives. We are told to put on the full armor of God so we can be ready for whatever Satan throws at us. Are there any thoughts or questions to go along with that section? If not, Sierra, would you go ahead and just finish out chapter 8 for us?
Finish it off.
Yeah, just finish off from verse 12.
Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Now sometimes this month Adar falls in March, sometimes in April. The Jewish calendar went on a 28-day cycle. The Jewish Passover came at this time. The sacrifice was put up for 4 days, from the 10th to the 14th, so it can be watched to make sure it was perfect. Christ was put up for 4 days, or 4,000 years, before he was our sacrifice. From Adam to Noah, 2,000, and from Noah to Christ, 2,000. Then Christ was found to be perfect and was our sacrificial lamb.
What's your thought?
I'm trying to remember. Trying to remember the map in my head, the timeline in my head, to see if that works.
He stretches it a little bit to paint the picture, but it's fairly close. Adar would end usually beginning of March to the beginning of April. If you recall, in Exodus, God commanded Israel to have the Passover in the first month, the first full moon, the first month of the year. And so as he's talking about Adar falling in March or in April, that's more of the end of the month. Looking forward to the time of Passover coming later. And then the timeline there at the end, the 4,000 years before he was our sacrifice from Adam to Noah was closer to about 1,600 years, and I can't remember exactly how long it was between Noah and Christ, but the picture's clear. Anyways, is there anything else to go along with that, or continue? Would you go ahead and continue that for us?
The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all the people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the hosts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan, the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. Notice Mordecai was writing in royal apparel. God's laws are going to rule supreme upon this earth, and the authority was given to him by Esther, who represents the church. God's laws and word shall cover the earth. There will be a righteous kingdom upon this earth, ruled over by Christ and the church. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, and the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them.
Thank you. Are there any thoughts or questions on that section?
It's funny how a lot of the people joined in with the Jews after they found out they weren't going to be punished anymore, or they weren't going to be tortured.
Yeah. Well, and especially considering that the only people that had to fear their wrath were the people that were intending on acting against them.
Right.
If I understand the decree correctly, Mordecai just gave the Jews power over the people who would come against them. God would deliver the Jews from the people who were actively coming against them in violence, regardless of age or gender. But if you weren't going to attack the Jews, you really didn't have to worry about them. But we still see that, much like when the Jews came into the Promised Land, there as Jericho. What was it that the spies were told? The entire city was terrified because they had heard of what God was doing for the Jews. Were there any other thoughts or questions for this section?
I like how the Mordecai, being representative of the law, is honored and celebrated. Like, I know it was honored and celebrated before from Haman's thing, but it just, like, I don't know, it reminded me of like how today some things in God's law people argue with or like don't agree with, you know, they fight Christianity and God from it, and I just like the imagery of it being celebrated and honored.
Yeah. Good thoughts. Are there any other thoughts? We are getting to be about quarter till. Do we want to start in on chapter 9 tonight, or do we want to save it for next week? Yes? You getting a nod? Yes?
Start it next week.
Huh?
Start it next week, is that what you're saying?
I
Or do you
think
wanna read-
Sierra's got a vote to start it tonight.
Okay, we can read it the ninth.
We won't make it all the way through, certainly. There is one section in here that we'll have to pause and comment about, but get it pulled up. I ran out of printer ink as I was printing the final copy of chapter 9, so I've got to go a little higher tech for this section. Alright, let's go ahead and go back to our Bibles and read chapter 9 of Esther. It's a little bit longer, 32 verses. We'll go ahead and read all the way through it and see what we have left for time this evening. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, and the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, it was turned to the contrary. The Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And Harshanditha and Delphon and Aspetha and a bunch of other places. Verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil they laid not their hand. On that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. Well, what have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? And what is thy petition that shall be granted thee? Or what is thy request further, and it shall be done? And said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it to be so done, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. The other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew their foes 70 and 5,000, but they laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. For the Jews that were in Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same, they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the walled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a good day, and of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces, King Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same, yearly, in the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, in the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them. Because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and to cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them, and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor of memorial of them that perish from their seed. And Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote all of authority to confirm the second letter of Purim, and he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces, the kingdom Ahasuerus, with the words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim and their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. We'll stop there. Long chapter, nice and dry after that. Sierra, would you go ahead and grab the introduction? Actually, you just read the ends. Brother Tony, would you go ahead and grab the introduction to chapter 9? And then, just go ahead and grab the introduction to chapter 9 for us, if you would.
As we go into the 9th chapter, we are going to see God's people starting to take over the kingdom and destroying all those who would have destroyed them. We know when Christ comes, he shall destroy all those who have tried to destroy the earth and his people. We see today that God's covenant people have very little to say about anything, just like it was here in Ahasuerus' kingdom. Satan rules here, and Haman ruled in that kingdom. But when Satan would have the upper hand, God will always find a way for his people to escape. If they look to him, he cannot say, well, I was in the midst of so much bitterness or evil that I could not escape. For where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. God never allows his people to be overcome by sin as long as they are looking to him for their every need.
Thank you. Are there any thoughts or questions about the introduction there? It is nice as we come to the end of the book of Esther, seeing all these parallels. We can really look and see the parallels of the triumph of Christ's second coming, and of God's people celebrating in that triumph. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think there'll be a lot more than just 2 days of yearly celebration when Jesus comes back and takes his throne. But we will go ahead and stop there. Thank you for your time, for your attention. I do suppose before we close, are there any thoughts on any of this? Or, if not, I would encourage you to read ahead in chapter 9. You all have it printed out there for you. Get some thoughts, come ready with some questions, with some comments next week. We have chapter 9, we have chapter 10. Chapter 10 of Esther is only a couple of verses, but then there is a conclusion to the booklet that's also tagged on to the end of chapter 10. So that does have a couple of pages of just commentary on the book of Esther. If there was nothing else, I would invite you all to stand. Go ahead. Kill the camera.